Hey guys, this is Vic Dorfman, and in this video I'm going to answer the question, what is really the point in having more than 3 interviews to hire or not hire a candidate? So this is a question that I saw on Quora, and I wrote a reply to it, and this is the video version of that reply. What I wrote is 3 is an admittedly arbitrary number, but I think in order to understand why it may or may not make sense to go through 3 rounds of hiring, or in some cases even more, it's useful to consider the points of view of both parties involved in the process, namely the company doing the hiring and the candidate. So from the company's point of view, it's hard to overstate the impact that a team member has on the company he works for, because a lousy team member will bring the entire company down, while an A player can help elevate it to new heights. One book that I really like is called Good to Great by Jim Collins, and he describes a company founder's or manager's mission in terms of hiring as getting the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus, and the right people in the right seats. And what he means there is that it's crucial to hire people who are fundamentally good workers, who are tenacious, diligent, intellectually curious, etc. But it's equally important that they're working in positions where they're actually able to thrive. Okay, so an A player in the wrong role will perform at a C player or worse level. And I've seen this phenomenon. I've been in that situation where I'm in a role that I'm not enjoying, and I'm just not performing because I'm not enjoying myself, right? That's a big deal. Passion counts. It really counts. Now, another consideration from the employer's perspective is that some people are great bullshitters. Some people sail through interviews. They tell their prospective employers everything that they want to hear, or what they think they want to hear, with glibness, but you can only keep that charade up for so long, right? Eventually, an intelligent interviewer, an intelligent manager or founder is going to sniff out your inconsistencies and get a pretty good sense of the kind of person he's actually dealing with. And so this is one of the reasons why the tandem interview is such a powerful tool in a company's hiring arsenal. And I'll talk about the tandem interview in just a second. But first, let's circle back around to this idea of 3 interviews during the hiring process. Arguably the hiring book of all hiring books is called Top Grading by Dr. Bradford Smart. And he claims in his research, which he presents in the book, that the cost of a mishire is between 5 to 27 times the amount of the team member's salary. So whether or not, how true that is, I don't know what the exact numbers really are. I don't think anybody knows. But assuming that it's even remotely true, we can view this multiple interview hiring procedure as, if nothing else, just good, prudent accounting. Because if you know that it's 27 times more expensive to mishire, then you're going to be pretty damn careful in your hiring process, right? It's sort of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure type of thing. But of course, it's not only a financial consideration. The quality of a business's team is arguably the biggest predictor of its success or lack thereof. Top Grading, and to an extent Who, the A Method for Hiring, which was written by the author of Top Grading's son, is also the hiring framework that popularized these so-called tandem interviews. And the way they work is that 2 members of the team, 2 people who are doing the hiring, conduct the tandem interview. One team member is actually doing the talking with the candidate, while the other team member is just kind of sitting there quietly, taking notes, making observations, and being an impartial judge, not getting swept up in the emotions or the cult of personality that some candidates know how to manufacture on demand. And I've been through such an interview. I've been through a tandem interview out in Berkeley when I lived in Silicon Valley, and I can attest to just how grueling they are, especially in that competitive environment. And Silicon Valley is incredibly competitive with a lot of really smart people. But you know what? Tandem interviews work. That's why they're done, and that's why we do them, and why you should be prepared for them from the perspective of a candidate, and why it's actually in your best interest as a candidate. Now, another consideration that the employer has to take into account is the morale and culture of his team, right? Because a new team member is going to affect and change the vibe of the entire team. That's just how it goes. We are social animals. Social psychology is a very complicated topic, and a bad team member or bad team members are good at creating what Eben Pagan calls black boxes for themselves. And this is something that I think it's called black boxes. I may not be remembering this correctly, but in his training series Altitude, he talks about hiring for a little while, and he basically says that there are certain people that they just know how to sort of occupy their time with low value busy work to give the appearance and the impression of doing actual work, but they're not really being productive. And building these black boxes, by the way, is not the same thing as becoming a linchpin. So one is valueless, the other is value adding. And the best-selling business/marketing author Seth Godin refers to people who do such good work or work in such a unique fashion that they become indispensable to their employers as linchpins. So that's really kind of the positive way of being a black box, or maybe a white box, or however you want to call it. Whereas building black boxes is just giving the appearance of work. And being a linchpin is actually doing amazing work, so much so that your employer doesn't want to let you go. And I can also freely admit that I was a terrible employee when I first got started in the sort of online tech world, which is in my early 20s. And I can attest to the temptation of basically doing anything but real work, because you know what? Real work is hard unless you're doing something that's really, really interesting to you. And so that's kind of the key is everything. If everything seems mundane, you're probably doing the wrong work. I mean, you might just be a lazy bastard, but you might not be a lazy bastard. You just might not be doing something that excites you. And I've learned over the years that this is a pretty immature attitude. And at that time, I was certainly immature, but especially considering the incredible depth now of unpalatable tasks and things I have to do in my role as a founder. But that's something that sort of grows on you, right? Sometimes it's really not a matter of being lazy, a lazy good for nothing. It's really just that you're doing a job that bores you and you'd rather do something exciting, and just the boredom is too large a barrier to overcome for whatever reason. Which really leads nicely to the next point. I think a big component of hiring somebody isn't merely whether or not they have the requisite qualifications. It's very much a matter of fit. Because, you know, oftentimes people will take jobs just to earn money, but they don't really care to do that particular job. It's just the means to the end of earning the money. And they may even convince themselves that, or temporarily convince themselves of a sort of shallow enthusiasm. You know, they'll psych themselves up like, yeah, I like this job. But they know deep down that they're not stoked about it. They're actually dreading it. And I've been in that position. Maybe you have as well. But while this is understandable, okay, so we're sort of taking an empathy perspective. We're looking at the employer side and the candidate side. While this is understandable, it's not in a company's interest, and it's not a company's prerogative to finance somebody's meandering career path, right? Like, they need to hire good people now. They can't be sort of paying people and training them only to have them do a poor job or quit because they're bored. Companies can't survive that way. They have to act in their own interest. And by acting in their own interest, they're actually acting in the interests of prospective candidates and of the society, but that's really a bigger can of worms. The point is that companies need great team members now, or they will, as most businesses do, fail. 9 out of 10 small businesses fail is the statistic that's very often cited. And if a mishire doesn't flat out ruin a company, which is obviously more probable in the early stage of a startup when it's vulnerable, it will at the very least greatly inconvenience the employer, because now you have to scramble to fill the role, and in the meantime the role is empty, but you have customers depending on the person who's no longer there. It's a really big inconvenience to the employer. So it's just a pain in the ass. So it's in the employer's, it's in the company's interest to hire right the first time. Again, ounce of prevention, pound of cure. And now let's sort of circle around and take a look at the point of view of the candidate. So as I said, I lived and worked in Silicon Valley for many years, and it's not at all uncommon to go through 2 or 3 interviews for an unpaid internship with a startup. And I'm not even talking about like a startup with a well-known founder with a track record. I'm talking about just any freaking startup. The word startup just gives everybody living there boners. It's just so competitive that people are willing to do that. They're willing to work for free. They're willing to pay to commute, to work for free at this company just to sort of break into this whole tech scene. It's that competitive. And, this highly competitive atmosphere attracts absolutely brilliant, hardworking, driven people. So naturally, when there's so much competition and so many smart people all hustling for a piece of the pie, it's vital that the job you work in excites and motivates you and makes the best use of your particular suite of talents, because that's your best insurance for success. If you're just going through the motions doing mundane work maladroitly, how are you going to compete with these people who are just beyond driven? You have to really try and find something that lights you on fire. I didn't think that was really important. I had sort of a post-World War II immigrants mentality about that, like whatever, do the job, earn the money, support the family kind of thing. But I don't know if that paradigm is applicable to today, or if it has to be, right? You could do what you want and you could get well paid for it. So, going through multiple interview rounds is in your, as a prospective employee, best interest. And I'll tell you a little story. A developer friend of mine actually went through 5 rounds, if I'm not mistaken. It might have been 4. I think he said 5. This was a long time ago, but he went through a lot of freaking interviews to get hired at this mobile game development company in the Bay Area. I think it was in Menlo Park or somewhere south of San Francisco. And what they had him, first they had sort of the interview to feel him out. Then they had 2 of those. Then I think they had 3 technical interviews. Right, so how those work is that you show up and they're like, okay, here's a problem, code their solution. And he's like, okay, and they're like, okay, well, what about this and what about this and all of these contingencies, and he has to code on the fly. So he went through all of these interviews, and long story short, he got the job. He wound up working with a team of brilliant, passionate people just like him, made a lot of money, even by Bay Area standards. It's a very expensive area to live in. And despite being pretty much entirely self-taught and in his early 20s. And he was having the time of his life. He was living in a house. He rented a house with his colleagues. They were coding stuff. I mean, he was loving it. And I can tell you, as an entrepreneur now, I'm in my 30s though, running 2 online services-based businesses, a WordPress membership site support service and a managed WordPress hosting company. I've hired quite a bit of people. Some were disasters, some were rock stars, but by making plenty of mistakes, learning as much as I can about hiring and management, and by consulting with mentors who have much more experience than I've managed to improve my hit rate on hiring quote-unquote rock stars pretty considerably. And of course, in addition to everything I've just mentioned, all of the strategies and methodologies that we've just talked about, I would say for my little corner of the web, the number one hiring hack that I've found is relates to where you're sourcing your talent. And in our case, we get most of our team members from Eastern Europe. I think it's you have the best PQR, the best price to quality ratio, or QPR, I suppose, is just as well, because I don't know why, but Eastern Europe just produces really talented people who work for very reasonable rates. And you know, I've hired all over the world, and Eastern Europe, in my opinion, is the best value. Okay. Now, finally, I'll leave you with a quick thought, which is what I call the marriage analogy, and it goes like this. You wouldn't marry somebody after just one date, right? Hopefully. So why would you hire somebody after only one interview? Okay, to me, it seems that the one interview paradigm is as arbitrary and foolish as the 8-hour workday. I mean, who said that you only do one interview? I mean, the very question itself of why should you do 3 interviews begets another question, which is why should you do only one interview? It's not enough. Okay, that's the point. It's not enough. And granted, it's not the same thing as getting married, but you know, for a company, depending on the laws and the obligations involved from a regulatory standpoint, man, hiring people, paying them, there's so much that goes into it. There's so much involved that it's really in the company's interest to hire the right people from the get-go. And that's pretty much all I have to say on this topic. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. Happy to come around and answer. If you like these sort of like short essay type videos, let me know. I'll bust out a few more of them, and I'll see you guys next time.